Okay,
So
I'm
you just
recording.
boosted the numbers by an extra one.
Great. Okay, I'm recording. Thank you everybody for your patience. We're starting 10 minutes late, and I don't know how you all feel about ending 10 minutes late, but let's see how. Okay, if you have to do what you need to do so that you get your break before the next panel, then so be it. But we may end 10 minutes later because we started 10 minutes later. Okay, I'm recording and I have put the presenters in spotlight. Our moderator, Chris Dubs, and our panelists are on spotlight. So you can keep your video on. They will only be the ones who are recorded, not the people with videos on. So please keep yourself muted at all times so that we have a good recording. But also it can be quite distracting for the panel. And the background noise can really be quite jarring as well. So if anything comes up and you require emotional support, please know that you can always reach out to me, and you can also email us at support@loveabilities.org. I'm gonna remind participants to not contact one another without consent. We just want to protect fellow participants. Presenters are fair play. The reason being that presenters have done emotional regulation and inner work on themselves. Presenters have put themselves out there, and you can contact the presenters. And if you need any support whatsoever, you can contact me. Okay, so I'll pass this time over to Chris Dubs. Thank you for doing this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's really great to be here actually on the last day, as it were. It's yes, lots been going on. So a little about me, I guess. I was injured back in '93, so I was 30 when I was injured. I'm a spinal injury. I identify as he, him, and I'm straight. I've worked before and after my injury. I'm a journalist, and I'm interested in all these matters. I've also do some work at Stoke Mandeville Spinal Unit in the patient education team, working with fresh injuries as we go through the rehab process. So that's me. So Gary.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Gary Dawson. I am a spinal injury. I fell off a motorbike 17 years ago when I was 19 years old, and I'm a T6 complete. Completely paralyzed from the chest down. I do have fully functioning upper limbs. My hands and hands work fine, but I have no feeling, no sensation, no control of bodily function and sexual dysfunction. So effectively, I can feel the top half of my nipple and I can't feel the bottom, and then nothing below that. I was an electrician at 19, wasn't able to return to work. So I spent the next 8 years sort of playing intensive high-level sport, mainly wheelchair basketball. And now I work for the UK's national charity, the Spinal Injuries Association, and I'm the support network coordinator. My job is to support people who sustain some form of spinal cord injury and help them adapt to life after injury. We see people from the early days in intensive care all the way through rehab and post-discharge, and we cover every topic of gaining confidence and self-esteem to be out as a potential wheelchair user, relationships, managing your bowels and bladder, returning to work, and every other possible thing you can think of.
Great, thanks a lot there. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Keel. I was shot and paralyzed from the neck down when I was 19. So sophomore at Penn State. Physically, Gary described everything perfectly. I'm just about a little bit further up. I can only feel and move about as far as I can reach my chin, right to about my collarbone. So my injury line is just below the top of my shoulder. One of my favorite stories is I was shot in April. And my professors were all really cool about letting me have the grades I had without taking finals. So that semester counted. I spent 2 months in ICU, 2 months in rehab in Shepherd Spinal Center in Georgia, and got back home middle of August. And it just so happened, since I got those grades in the spring, I was still technically enrolled. So 2 days out of rehab, I was re-enrolled in college, and I went back to school and picked up a couple classes and had a chaotic time of getting to and from, but I stayed in school and finished with a bachelor's in psych and a master's in rehab counseling. I went on to start my own health and fitness center when I was in grad school with a buddy of mine. My graduate internship rolled into a position at a vocational rehab center, which is a funky way of saying it's a community college with a wide variety of supports for any number of disabilities, whether they're acquired and physical, or whether they're cognitive or neurological or congenital, or whatever kind of disability, spinal cord to learning disability to autism to spina bifida. We cover everything in this comprehensive rehab center, and all the coinciding supports that might be needed, ranging from cognitive skills to assistive technology. I've run social skills and life skills groups, sexuality and intimacy groups. Mainly everything focuses on employment and empowerment, but to be empowered and to have a true full life, there's a whole lot more things to cover. So I've run a wide variety of groups and different things. And I wrote a book last summer, chronicling the journey of my perspective on life before I got shot, and then during and after, and then on some of the adventures and craziness that has ensued afterwards.
That's pretty comprehensive. Thanks for that, Mike. Winter, are you with us?
Yep, I'm right here. So I'm the odd man out on this panel because I'm not mobility impaired. I don't have a spinal cord injury. I have a neurological condition that causes involuntary movements and sounds. That's my sort of primary disability. As a consequence of that, I also have a broken vertebra in my neck that causes long-term chronic pain issues. And then I've got a host of other crap as well. Professionally, my journey has been sort of a weird one. I studied adaptive and universal technology in college with a specialty in designing equipment for people with disabilities. And then went on and ran a small product design firm with that focus for a few years until the Great Recession made everything go boom. I transitioned from there into full-time teaching in the kink, BDSM, and sexuality world, mostly traveling to conferences and teaching there. And then I transitioned from that to being the assistant producer as well as an educator for a big kink and BDSM festival. And now I have been working full-time as a photographer, but the pandemic recession has made that go boom. I'm also the odd man out in that I'm the only one on the panel who identifies as some stripe of queer. Specifically, I identify as gay for male presenting people and demisexual for female presenting people and non-binary presenting people.
That's interesting. A quick question, how can you explain a bit more what that means exactly?
So folks who identify as demisexual, demisexuality involves the idea that there isn't any sexual attraction or generally romantic attraction with another person until there's already an emotional and or intellectual connection. So when I see a hot male presenting person, I look at them like, wow, I would really like to suck his cock. And when I see someone who's female presenting as an aesthetically minded person, I can be like, oh, that person is attractive, but I don't feel any attraction to them. But if I develop emotional connection, I can start to develop sexual attraction. So I recently broke up with a girlfriend I was with for 5 years. And that was the second sort of female presenting person I was in a long-term relationship. The first was my husband, who was female presenting for the first 9 years that my husband and I were together before he ended up transitioning. So I've been with my husband for 21 years. And for 9 of those years, we had a third husband, also a cis guy. And being polyam, we date other people as well.
That's pretty comprehensive.
It's what I do.
It's great. I suppose it, in a way, it illustrates here we are in the disabled community, and I'm learning something here right now from you, Winter. And I guess the outside world, when they look at us with our disabilities, they struggle. They have so much to learn, don't they? I mean, I'll start with you if you don't mind, Winter. I mean, how do you feel your disability has affected your relationships, your intimacy with others, and what challenges you've had?
Quite a bit. I teach a whole workshop just on disability in kink and BDSM, in part because of my own experiences and those of people I've been with. But specifically for me, Tourette syndrome, the neurological condition I have, is for one thing rather socially stigmatizing. It is hard to be like, oh, let's meet up at a coffee shop and go on a first date. And you have to stop and explain, like, cool, just so you know, I'm going to be barking like a dog and twitching, and I might be screaming some obscenities, but if that's all cool, let's meet at a coffee shop, which is a steep road for some people to climb. In addition, just the idea that people, as a rule, the abled population has a hard time seeing people with disabilities as sexual creatures. That alone is a challenge. But for me, there's, you know, as one guy put it in Turning Me Down once, it is hard enough to be socially in a relationship in public with a man. Being out in public with a man who is drawing a great deal of attention due to the nature of his disability is just an added hurdle that for some people is too much. And then within a relationship context, you know, people who are like, oh, I can totally deal with, you know, the barking and whatever, but the chronic pain and some of that stuff that comes with it, that can be challenging for someone in a relationship as well. My ex-husband, when he left my husband and I, one of the things he said was, you know, I don't remember how old he was, like 26, and he was like, no, he was older than that. He said, you know, at 30 or whatever, I just feel like I'm too young to be shackled to someone with a chronic disability, which he has since recanted. You know, I was trying to find a thing to hurt you, but it still sticks in your brain like a, you know, like a thing you can't quite let go of.
Yeah, that word, yes, shackled. Yeah, I get it exactly. Sometimes they're going on a journey to learn about us as well, aren't they? And it's not for everybody, you know, and you have to accept that some people, acceptance seems to be the key with their behaviors sometimes, isn't it? And just let them go.
Yeah, he remained incredibly close part of my family, and he got married a couple of years ago, and his wife has some significant disability stuff. And as part of the wedding ritual, people who were close to both of them challenged them about the nature of their relationship. And my challenge to his wife was like, I know you know, but you have to remember that when he left us, this is what he said. Are you prepared for the fact that as someone with a chronic disability, this is an attitude that he at least at one point held? And she said that when he proposed, that was I know she proposed to him. When she decided to propose to him, that was a really hard thing, as she had to really wrestle with that element of his past.
Yeah, and what's great about what you've just described there is it's the communication, isn't it? And putting it out there and letting people know and not hiding stuff away. For me, just to say that I think I've become more open through time because of the disability. So many people in the what's the word the able-bodied world tend to hide this stuff because they do. Whereas, I don't know, for me, I've become more open. I don't know. What do you think about that?
When I teach classes specifically about kink and BDSM and disability, half the class is communication strategies. And the idea that, like, on the one hand, there's a lot that needs to be talked about. On the other hand, one of the things I find fascinating is that a lot of these conversations are conversations that everyone should be having in their intimate relationships. But as folks with disabilities, we have to have them. Which, if you approach it the right way, can help set up for success. That's been a really interesting sort of thing, is realizing, like, oh, you know, these are these ways that we have to be open and we have to be communicative and we have to expect the same return from the people who we're intimate with and the people we're involved with. A lot of those are good strategies for successful relationships and successful sexual interactions and successful BDSM scenes, but we don't get the option of ignoring them. We don't get the option of saying, nah, it'll be fine.
Exactly. Is that something you found as well, Gary, with your experiences?
So my experiences have been quite varied. I mean, going from the able-bodied world as a as a heterosexual 19-year-old going out trying to pull women at weekends, trying to thing, to the world of disabilities, which is instantly limiting and the boundaries and everything sort of forced upon you. And in a world that you're not slowly growing to, you have just, it's an instant blink of the eye. This is your new existence. I must admit that my disability was initially something that was a massive hindrance in my dating world, but once I got my head around it and became comfortable and confident about talking with it, it was the biggest asset that I've ever had when it comes to dating. On a night out, I could guarantee I could get 10 numbers. I'd have people sat on my knee, kissing me, which is a handy place, if they need somewhere to sit at the end of the night, and the high heels have killed the feet all night. And I used it to my advantage. And in the same with sort of the online dating world, I put myself out there. And what actually works, which I wasn't expecting, is the fact that because I was being so honest about the most vulnerable part of my life, that's probably the most endearing thing to women, and absolutely loved it. Which all of a sudden, the way I see it, every single person in the world's got some form of disability, because everyone lives with anxiety or stress but these are things that, as Winter was saying, they can be hidden away, and you might not know that about somebody until you've been with them for several months or weeks or whatever. Whereas we have no choice. This is who I am. I can't turn up and pretend to walk in. I'm a wheelchair user. I'm going to roll in. If they don't like that, they don't like that. But as long as I pre-warn them and say, look, I'm turning up in a wheelchair, and again, if you don't like it, you're not going to be when they get there. Tell me now, because I'm not wasting my time. But as far as the actual dating side of it and relationship, I'd say for me it's been a massive asset, because it instantly gives me something to talk about as well. As again, I'm very, very comfortable to talk about every element of my injury, and I say that people do find that very endearing.
That's cool. Michael, what about you?
I probably a little bit of both of those aspects. It's been initially, and it was extremely hard. I had mentioned before, whenever we were talking, that when I first got hurt, I was 19-year-old, like Greg, like Gary, and I was a 6'2", 200-pound rugby player. That my definition of self-worth was based on my body type, and I looked in the mirror, and that's what I was basing everything off of. Nothing in between my ears, just what I was doing outside on the rugby field or in the weight room, and that changed in an instant. And all of a sudden, I now had to redefine what I thought about myself, and had to figure out a way to make the image in the mirror look back at me and smile instead of look like. So that was quite a hurdle. I agree with Gary about the lap thing, though. I've used that for decades, though, because the only way I can dance with someone is for them to sit on my lap, and I've had that quite a few times. Now with the invention of cell phones, and I have a mount on my wrist that is a little bit inhibiting, so sometimes I got to rip it off there, so there's plenty of room for someone to sneak on there. But one of the big hindrances, though, that has really gotten in the way is two things. First, I'm not very good at organizing. I was always going to just fly by the seat of my pants, and when I was 19 and at a party at the rugby house, and there's a cute woman I wanted to hook up with, maybe we sneak out and go upstairs, and wham bam, just in an instant, and it's spur of the moment. Now I've got to make all kinds of arrangements, and I've got to think things through and plan for stuff. I mean, if I've got a straight cast, so that number one, I don't risk making a mess, and two, it's easier to get an erection if my bladder's empty. So that's a whole physiological change that isn't it's an easy conversation for me to have, but I've got to have the right person to have that conversation with, um, which leads to the other thing that's sometimes a hurdle, because I think with my level of injury, that I need to use attendant care to get up in the morning, to get thrown in bed at night, to get transported, to drive from one place to another. So when I meet a woman, my first hurdle to get through is when I can see it in their eyes when they're looking and thinking, all right, he's cute, but am I going to have to take care of him? Am I going to have to be his nurse? Am I going to, what's going to be involved in dating? And I've got to jump 3 dates in when I first meet someone to sort of explain what my body can and can't do and how I manage attendant care and things without going too far into too much information and off-putting someone. So it's a tap dance fine line of, too much information versus, you know, clarifying that no, I've got my attendant care doing what I need to. I'm looking for a partner that I can have fun with and be intimate with and do crazy stuff with, not someone that takes care of me.
Yeah, getting that dividing line. So yeah, because you use PAs a lot, obviously, whereas that must be quite tricky to sort of draw that line there. How do you set those boundaries early on? Is it just
There's no, at least I haven't figured out a cut and dry easy way. It's different for every single woman that I've come in contact with. I dated one woman.
We lost Mike.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
he
I've
was cut
lost-
off.
I could not get her past. It's not getting fixed.
hang on? We lost you for a while, Mike.
Oh, okay. My back.
Lost about a minute of that anecdote, and then you came back in.
So I dated a girl for a couple weeks who could not get past that she kept telling me I needed to see a doctor about my spinal cord injury. I said, it's not getting fixed. It's not changing. Well, but you still need to go see a doctor. I saw doctors for quite a while. It's not changing. So.
Is that the case though? That in the able-bodied, they want you to be cured, don't they? They want there's some sort of that
there are
desire to see it.
Right. There are some. One of the contrasts with the way the able-bodied world views disability is it's got an odd dichotomy. Like Winter was talking about going to the coffee shop and sitting down. When I go to a coffee shop, it's automatic. It's not people looking and staring and wondering why doesn't he control that I'm guessing Winter gets. It's more of an automatic. Oh, that poor little kid, that poor quad. Look at him trying to get through the door. Maybe I'll go hold the door for him, or maybe I'll make sure he's okay. My favorite question is when I'm sitting there, on my phone or waiting for someone will come up and say, do you need help? With what? So.
It's meant from a sincere point of view, isn't it? That it's in the UK we call it the does he take sugar syndrome.
I dated a guy with spina bifida for a while, and we'd be out on a date, and he was a chair user. Most of the time, he was an ambulatory chair user, and people we'd be out on a date, and people would ask me what he wanted for food, and be like, ask him. He's right fucking here. It is, and it happens with me when I'm out with if I'm in an airport or something with my partner. Is security will approach my partner and ask all sorts of questions about me while I'm standing right there.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I ran into that so much when I first got hurt that over the years I figured out a little trick that I use, and it's been working for the past probably 10 or 15 years. When I go out to eat, when I'm on a date, or when I if I'm traveling, go to the airport, as soon as someone's coming up and approaching, whoever I'm with, I make eye contact, I smile, and I say something. I say hi, or I say, what's going on? Or is it, I make some type of comment. So automatically they've got to engage with me. And that sort of prevents that most of the time. And they don't, because I've had plenty of people go to the woman I'm with and say, and what would he like to drink? Oh, my favorite is when I order a mixed drink and they look at the woman and say, is he allowed to have a drink? What?
Unbelievable. How about you, Gary? What have you done? And what are your little tactics there to break down the barriers?
Well, I must admit, so it frustrates the hell out of me if someone sort of sees me as almost like a second-class citizen because I'm sat down as opposed to the person who stood up next to me. And like Mike, it's that initial, I suppose it's that confidence, projection and presence, so that when someone's coming over, I'm edging forwards. It's like I'm the one who's going to initiate this conversation. When we go to hotels, me and my girlfriend, we go quite, well, was going to wait quite a bit before COVID, but I'd approach the desk and say, right, we're here to check in. Same thing at restaurants, and again, it's just making me feel like I'm an equal sort of partner in this relationship. And I'd hate it when people assume that my girlfriend's my carer. I've got a very attractive girlfriend, and just because I'm in a wheelchair, there's that natural assumption that, well, that must be his carer. So, well, actually, no, she's my girlfriend, lover, everything that you could possibly imagine. And one thing she doesn't do, well, one thing she mainly doesn't do, she doesn't care. So I get all the comments from her when we're out that people make sure that says, oh yeah, they're definitely just a normal couple. But I must admit, I've been injured for 17 years, and in the early days of that, people asking what I wanted, oh, I'd snap. And when I was still young and angry and trying to deal with this, it was like, am I fucking not here or something? And, oh my God. But I generally think it's just society. People are so terrified of offending us. They go do everything possible to go out of the way and end up offending us anyway. So it is very difficult.
See, there's a place, Gary, where your and my experiences are very different. Because I'm part of life being me is being harassed by people in public. Like, that's just, and, folks, always good when you get parents who are egging their kids on to harass me in public. Tons of fun. People don't give so much of a shit about offending me. It is worth noting, by the way, that we all have a level of privilege around communication. I have a very close, one of my oldest friends has cerebral palsy, and it affects his speech. This is a guy who's a very well-respected lawyer, but his speech is not always clear, and it's not always quick. And that has a huge impact on the way that people perceive him especially when he's out with someone who communicates more clearly, and trying to convey that, like, he is a person with full agency, and yeah, if he wants a mixed drink, he's going to have a mixed drink. That is one of those things to just keep in mind, and that affects his experience of sexuality, certainly, because it contributes to the way that people want to infantilize him and see him as not a sexual creature or creature with person with agency.
Well, that's interesting.
Ooh.
So, okay, so Winter, with your disability, so how did it affect your choices that you made, sexually or otherwise? Has there been anything or is it because it's your reality, it's just who you are anyway, so there isn't any difference?
I think that one of the biggest differences is that in the gay men's community, there can be an enormous focus on perception and perfection. And I know it's kind of an ugly stereotype, but there is something to it. And I know that I have had a tendency to not try to engage with men who I see as being too idealized or too perfect, because of the assumption that they wouldn't want to be with someone with my kinds of flaws, which I totally acknowledge is an unhealthy attitude for me to have and totally unfair to them. But the message as gay men, especially growing up as a gay youth in the late 80s, early 90s, mostly early to mid 90s, when we were just coming out of, I don't want to say, when we were really just coming out of the plague years of HIV, the realization that protease inhibitors and modern antiretrovirals meant that people with HIV were going to live. There was this real pivot, this strong pivot towards a huge focus on virility and masculinity and physical perfection that was very, very at odds with my experience as someone living with a significant and very hard, a very obvious disability. And it really impacted my ability to feel like I could put myself out there. Most of my serious relationships and even a lot of my sort of hookups have been with people who I know or I've met in a non-dating context. That's complicated by the fact that I'm a kink and BDSM educator. So like, I can't say a non-sexual context because you're at a conference where everyone's taking classes on sex and kink during the day and then all doing naughty things in the dungeon and sex play space at night. But places where I didn't necessarily, in spaces where I didn't go out looking for someone to be with, because I feel like it's very hard for me to put myself out there in that way, because, the whole conversation around the Tourette gets complicated. I've had a lot of guys tell me like, oh, don't mention the Tourette like on your dating profiles or when you're first talking to someone, like get to know them first and then bring it up. And it's like, no, because for me, it's so depressing if I start to engage with someone online or whatever, and then the Tourette comes up and then they ghost me, or they say like, nope, that's more than I can handle. For me, I have found that it is healthier for me to put myself like right out there and be like, this is my reality. And if that causes people to not be on board, then all right. But it has, on a more personal level, it has had a huge effect on my sexuality and my sense of sexual self. And then when I really hurt myself quite badly, which I did ticking, that further sort of compromised my sense of self, because our idea of masculinity, especially within the gay world, can be so bound up in physical virility and strength and, the six-pack abs and the, everything else that goes with that trying to figure out where me as someone who doesn't have full control over his body, who, doesn't pass in society as someone who's normal, which is quote unquote normal. That's all really has left me sort of like, well, how do I exist in this world as a sexual person?
Challenges there. So Michael, because you were talking about the wheelchairs out there and all the rest of it. But if you're dating online, do you tend to pull the wheelchair back initially? I know I did to begin with back in the day, because I've dated on and off for 20 years now online. And I would, it would be a conversation and a phone conversation, and then I'd sort of drop it in a bit later. Oh, and by the way, so I'd sort of established some sort of a rapport already, and they got to know me as a person without seeing the chair. Is that something you've done, Mike?
Well, when I first started using things like Match.com years ago, that the first couple of times I posted pictures and things, it was just of my face. It was just a profile shot or a headshot, and then after a message back and forth, and I mentioned the I'm a quad, that ghosting, that step away, because the minute they find out I'm in a chair, felt like shit. So I stopped. I made sure I put it out there from the get-go, because I'd rather have them not respond or not consider than start doing it than bail. It just feels far worse to have them somewhat engaged and then look at that and then bolt than it is to, for them to not do it. I mean, let's face it, we all have baggage. Everyone's got baggage they bring to relationships, to their social lives. Mine happens to be strapped to my ass for everyone to see. That's the only difference between everyone else.
So for you, Gary?
Yeah, so I've done both. When I've spent sort of periods of years where I've been single, and I've always used things like Tinder and Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Match, etc. And sometimes I'll trial it where I'll just put a picture of myself and some brief information and see sort of who I attract. And then other times I'll put pictures of my chair and I'll say, I have a spinal injury. I am a wheelchair user. I cannot walk. And I'll be honest with you, the most successful ones were the ones where I put the wheelchair in, because like Mike said, that when you do drop it in, well, actually, oh, by the way, I'm paralyzed from the chest down. They don't know what to do and they panicked and they said, they just ghost me. It makes me feel shit. It makes me, I've almost set them up because, no, it's not for me to tell them what they should and shouldn't be attracted to. And if they're not attracted to disabilities, that's absolutely fine. That's their decision. But it puts us both in a really awkward position, as opposed to me just putting, well, there's a picture of me in my wheelchair. There's a picture of me in a suit. There's a picture of me in other things. And then there's a brief, yeah, I did break my back. This happened. Ask me any questions that you want and take it from there. Use that information as you want. And I suppose when I was first on the dating site, sort of back in 2006, it was very different to sort of the latest time, which was 3 years ago, where the world had moved on and people's perceptions of disability had changed. And so for me, I say that it was, I had better results putting the information out there for everyone who's involved. And I say, if someone doesn't want to reply to my message because they see me in a wheelchair, well, I'm not going to waste several weeks chatting back and forth, trying to convince them that I'm a good person, even though I'm a wheelchair user. If they're not going to see it from there from day one, then they're not going to be convinced at a later date. And I wouldn't want someone like that either. So that worked for me.
I found those full body pictures are a lot more spark conversations a lot better too, especially when it's something like I'm on the top of a cruise ship, or I'm visiting out in San Diego, I'm in San Diego Zoo, or Disney World, or on a beach or something like that. So there's a whole lot of other things for them to comment on, to recognize, to strike up a conversation about, other than, wow, that's a big ass wheelchair.
I met my girlfriend on Bumble, and everything was out there, all the information, the chair, the pictures, my injury. And her first question to me was, so you've been to loads of places in the world, what's your favorite? Because I put, those pictures of me in New Zealand and in Australia and traveling around, handsacking around the world. And so that was what her question was, not, oh, you see you in a wheelchair, what happened? So yeah, I agree, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. I think it is the way forward these days. Yeah, very much so. I know that for me, it's also for me, I mean, it's the choices I've made, actually. I suppose I've moved further onto the alternative scene. I prefer the word libertine, but you can use the word swingers as well, as I found that scene, for my mind, is far more accepting of my disability than the normal world, the able-bodied world. I'm less patronized. People see me for the whole sexual being I am, because I think one of the things I found post-injury is, I mean, as a man, you've always got that connection with sexual performance. You're always worrying about, oh, am I good in bed? And is this right? Am I doing this the right thing? The clock's ticking. Let's think about cold showers. And a lot of that was taken away from me after injury. I could park that. And that gave me a lot of confidence. And I could focus on what I think is my biggest sexual organ, which is my brain, which sort of, it actually opened up a hell of a lot to me, much more so than before in a way.
I'd have to fully agree with you there. I think when I became paralyzed, the notion of just have orgasm and be done with is gone. There is no orgasms anymore for me. There's no ejaculation. It's just I can't feel anything. So I can still have sex. I can still get an erection with medications or various different sort of methods, but to stimulate me sexually was actually started looking further outside the box and experimenting more with and seeing what fantasies you can explore, and is looking at, say, the various different worlds that are out there. And I think that was for me quite quite liberating as well, because it's like it's no longer just this stereotypical man has sex, orgasms and done. It was, the focus became more on, what more can we do? How can we explore? How can we sort of titillate each other in different ways? And again, the spinal injury is what opened me up to a wider world.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mitch talks a lot about that about being about being goal oriented versus, staying in the moment. And that made a lot of sense to me, because I'm the same way. I'm not having an orgasm. I can get an erection. It's easier if I straight calf, but that there's a whole lot of other stuff going on between, kissing and touching and playing and riding and screwing and going down and up and down, me going down on a woman, other than the rabbit coming out of the hat. I mean, there's lots of other stuff.
Yeah, I always say to people that I think ejaculation is just a reflex, like sneezing. It's not an orgasm. Orgasm is a complete body experience in the head and everywhere else. There is a massive difference.
The science writer Mary Roach did a book not that long ago, all about the experience of soldiers, and she has a very extensive section about soldiers recovering from injury and rehabilitation. And there's a really interesting thing that stuck with me there, where a researcher was talking to this doctor who worked with patients in rehabilitation, mostly with severe spinal injuries and other such things. And the researcher said, what do you talk about with them about sex? And the doctor sort of got offended and said, well, we don't. What's there to talk about? And she said, well, the sex, these are people with partners and so on. And the doctor said, well, I don't think you understand. These men are profoundly injured. And she said, I guess my question is, does he have a tongue and does he know how to use it? Which I thought was a great response. And it was so interesting that there had just been this decision without any consultation with the actual people involved, that their lives as sexual beings were over. And that's what the medical folk had made that decision, rather than a conversation about what they and their partners wanted their sexual lives to look like, what they could look like, and figuring out how to make them work. There had just been this decision of like, well, whatever. And I mean, even in my own life, I see a tiny piece of that where I was on a medication that caused severe sexual side effects. And my doctor was like, well, so like if the medication works otherwise, what's the big deal? And it's like, well, for me, my experience of sexuality is an important part of my physical and emotional and psychological well-being. And having a drug that makes that not possible is just not workable for me. And trying to get, my doctor to understand that, like, no, a drug that has this effect, like I'm not interested in simply giving up my experience of sexuality because I need a medication to treat one of my disability issues.
Now,
One of
my
my
sorry,
favorite
Michael.
lines, sorry, Winter, one of my favorite lines is out of a movie called Born on the 4th of July. They say, what you don't have in your hips, you still have in your lips.
Yes. Has anybody else got any good phrases then that they use in conversation when we...
I've used one that said, if you let me between your legs, we can have some fun. But if you let me between your ears, I'll blow your mind.
Oh, I like that. I'm writing that one down. That's brilliant. Yes. What about you, Gary? Any killer lines you've used?
No, nothing really. I mean, we've all had the question who was wheelchair users, where people come up to you in that silent or that whisper of, like, no, can you still have sex? I'm like, of course I can. It's like, say, it might not be the same as before, but I've got tongues and thumbs, and that say, do whatever you need to do with that. And it's, yeah, I suppose, I mean, one of the best things about being a very different injury to Mike, and I do have upper limb function, and about trial and error and experimentation, and people assume naturally that, oh, you just have to lie there and sort of let them do all the work. And, well, actually, no, I've got physical strength. I can get on top, and because I can use my shoulders, my chest, and I can still go at it as much as I can't feel it. And you have to sort of guide me in because I don't know if I'm there or not, but it still works. And again, it's all about trial and error. And I've always said to people, if you're someone who's willing to experiment and, let's see what happens, let's have some fun. Says it might not be your conventional, what you're used to on a one-night stand, but hey, we'll have a laugh. And That's always been my philosophy, when, especially when meeting someone new.
Yeah, I think it's very much we are teachers in a way, isn't it? And projecting out, getting past their ignorance, which is not their fault, it's just the state of play where they are. And then once you open that door, you tend to find that, as I've said before, I think I've had a more fulfilled sex life post-injury than pre.
When I first got back out of rehab and I went back to school, I had fraternity brothers that would straight cath me every couple hours so I could be on campus, and that's the only way I could pee early on. Well, the first time they taught my girlfriend how to straight cath me, I got an erection right away, and so the following what was it, Monday or something like that, on campus, I'm pulling on campus and getting out of my accessible van, and some of my fraternity brothers were about 100 yards, 50 or 100 yards away at the student union, saw me getting out of the van, and all you could hear yelled across campus was, "Yo, we heard you can still get a hard on." Like, okay, so those whispers of "Can you still have sex?" I played it to my advantage. Just started telling women. So the doctor says I can still have sex. You want to try?
Oh, brilliant lines, brilliant lines. What about you, Winter, at the gay scene and so forth? Those killer lines, are the same?
Nothing really comes to mind. The thing I encounter being in the kink world is that because I bark like a dog, as one of my vocal tics, people who are really into puppy play often assume that I'm trying to engage in puppy play with them when I'm not, and that always leads to some interesting conversations. One of the very first kink festivals I ever attended, I was sitting and at dinner in this dining hall, and I was ticking, and this person came up and started petting my head and said, "Good puppy." And I was sitting across from Lee Harrington, who was a presenter at one of the other panels, and I didn't know. I froze. I didn't know what the hell to do. And Lee was like, "Okay, I'm going to stop you there because there's a couple of things wrong right now," and proceeded to explain that, one, I wasn't a puppy player. I had Tourette. And two, it would be super inappropriate to come up and start petting a puppy player without their consent or without their handler's consent. So like, this person was creating faux pas on multiple levels. But yeah, it's interesting. When I'm out in public, one of the things that people will do to be obnoxious is bark back at me. Although I've stopped considering that to be obnoxious when kids do it, because I had a whole conversation with a neuroscientist about mirror neurons. But when I'm at kink events, I have to remind myself that people barking back at me are not trying to be jerks. They are trying to relate because they assume that I'm a puppy player, and puppies barking at each other at events is super common. And it's this thing where I have to like mentally shift my perception, remember that like my narrative is not the only narrative existing in this space. But no, there's no good Tourette pickup lines that I know of. And I never know how to feel about people who approach me because they think the Tourette is cute or they think the Tourette is hot. Like that always makes me a little weirded out. I've ended up in having both sex and relationships with people who thought the Tourette was cute, or they thought, or approached me because they thought the Tourette was hot. I've had some successful situations there, but you figure out very quickly if this is someone who has approached you and because of this thing, but are now seeing you as a person, or if this is someone who is only seeing you as a vehicle of this thing that they find interesting or hot.
Is that the same for you, Gary, Mike?
Yeah, I must admit, I've had a few people in the past who have been attracted to wheelchair users, and again, each to their own. You know, it's not my place to say. But for me, it was a bit strange. I met one girl online who was just obsessed with the idea of catheterizing me. That was her turn on, and it was like, that was something that took me a long time to sort of get my head around in the first place, catheterizing myself, let alone somebody else doing it, and that being a kink and that being their fetish was very odd. But I must admit, I've never really, I've only met one or two people in reality where they've sort of surprised me with some form of kink there and then. There's one lady who wanted to put like a collar on me and pull me around the house in my chair. But I was like 22 and I was terrified of anything like that at the time, sort of panicked and went, no, let's just keep it on. If only now.
Michael, what about you?
Well, the odd people attracted to my chair, I shouldn't say odd, the ones that made me feel uncomfortable, the ones that I didn't quite understand or wasn't just for me, or the ones that wanted to take care of me, like the mother hens that didn't really appear like they wanted to be in a relationship or be intimate. They wanted to more care for me and be a mommy type figure, and it wasn't not like a 50-50 relationship. It was, me being, marginalized and treated like a child. Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as random people coming up to me, I always try to assume goodwill, and it's very hard sometimes, but I really put a lot of effort into assuming goodwill, and I also call my chair an idiot magnet because it pulls in some bizarre people that come up and just make some wild, just odd comments. I had one guy come up to me and like 2 seconds in said, so what happened? Why are you in a chair? Which I'm fine with. So I got shot. He said, wow, cool. Like, okay, guess it's not as boring as a car wreck.
Other people never cease to amaze us, do they?
Yeah. Gary, I thought you would appreciate, because of your story, one thing that I talk a lot about in my BDSM and disability class, I get a lot of people in that class who are dominant identified and trying to figure out how to balance dominance with feelings of physical, I don't want to say inferiority, but like, how do I, especially if they've recently acquired disabilities, how do I remain dominant? And I always think about a fella I knew who rigged out his girl with a harness that she could wear that went to his chair, so that when they were like at a kink event, she could pull him around like a charioteer, because she was kind of into pony play, and that was his, instead of her pushing him in his chair because his arms would get tired, instead of that, which he felt very much made people perceive her as being in the dominant position because she was in control, he set her up as the pony pulling his chair like a charioteer, which I just thought was such a delightful way of reinforcing their power dynamic and conveying a really clear message to the people around them about the way that his disability did not disempower him as someone who identified as a dominant. And also, as someone who teaches a very popular workshop on sounding and catheterization and other urethral play, my personal experience has been that people who have to use catheters or who have to use sounds or who had to when they were younger are the number one people who are not interested in indulging that as a kink for someone.
Yeah, that's
there's a
well, that's yeah, well, because it's common. It's not a treat. It's common, and it's
right.
Every day.
Yeah.
How was that for you, Gary? Then do you agree?
I get what you're saying. I mean, my own personal sort of desires doesn't lend to that kind of world. It was more, I suppose, the shock at the time of what this person had proposed to me there and then. It was like, and being young and naive, and whereas when you get a bit older, you think, sorry, let's give it a go, see what happens. It's life's about experiencing things. You try it once, if you like it, you go again. If not, at least you've tried it. But I can imagine there's a lot of people out there who, and especially once they're in that disability world, do pigeonhole themselves as being just the submissive person who now lies in the bed and is only able to engage to a certain level and not thinking about that outside the box? Is there harnesses? Is there equipment? Things like the Easy Rider. Do you know what the Easy Rider is? I think it's the Easy Rider. Not the Easy Rider. It's called the Intimate Rider, sorry. Do you know what the Intimate Rider is?
I think so, yes. I think
It's a sex chair for people who haven't got hip thrust. And those things are absolutely amazing. They're incredibly expensive, but you know, if you're in the UK, you can get funding for them through various charities because it's, you know, improving your quality of life. But just something like that to make you be part of that animalistic act of sex again, even though you're still using a mobility aid or an aid of some kind, just changes the dynamic again. And I think, I say, with whether it's just, you know, someone going out there and inventing something or accessing something like the knowledge that you've got, Winter, where you say, well, actually, yeah, there's a whole world where people could find that. I think it's fascinating and brilliant, so people can continue to explore their sexual side, disability or not.
Sex and intimacy are all about bonding and connecting with another person. So when you can come up with something creative, when two people are together and they come up with something on their own, that's only going to serve to bring them even closer and make all this stuff even better.
I mean, the modern strap-on dildo was originally designed as an aid for people with disabilities. Something I learned about back in college when I was studying adaptive design, and then came back to in my sex ed work. You know, when there's so many examples in our lives of universal technology, things originally designed with disabilities in mind and applied elsewhere. But if you even today, the classic design of the strap-on silicone dildo doesn't have a round flange. It has a flange with a half moon cutout, which you don't see that often anymore, but that's the real traditional design. And it's because it was meant to be worn above a male assigned at birth person's penis for the purpose of having penetrative sex.
Every day's a school day.
it's interesting. I was long story, in Spain recently, and went to a sex supermarket there with my girlfriend, and looking at the world has come on a bit since that time, Winter. She was amazed by the choice and the feel of them, and would you like more girth or length and all the rest of it? And this wonderful conversation she's having with the guy. She said, I've never had this choice before. And that's something I don't think would ever have happened if I'd been able-bodied.
No. So my girlfriend, she used to work within the adult industry within the UK as a buyer and distributor for a sex toy manufacturer. And so we went to the ETO show, the Erotic Trade Only show. It's the first time I've ever been to anything like that. And it was, mind-blowing. The length and breadth of the toys and equipment that's now available to the market. And it was quite interesting because I was going around almost from an SIA rehabilitation point of view, and was talking to people about, well, actually, this would actually really benefit people with disabilities. For instance, there was a cock ring with a built-in camera, and they're using it, you know, people can film and they can. So, well, if you've got a person with disabilities who is just going to have to lie there, and unfortunately, as a disabled person, as you lie there, especially if you've got a paralyzed body, the stomach naturally expands, so it's hard to see what's going on. And I said, well, actually, have you pitched this to the world of disabilities? Because I imagine someone with a phone would actually like to see what's going on down where they can't feel. And it's really, and they've never even thought of that angle before. So yeah, but I was pitching all sorts of ideas to different companies out there. But yeah, completely eye-opening experience to see what is actually available outside your Love Honeys and your Bondara type websites.
Very much so. I guess, guys, I just thought I'd say, our participants, if you've got any questions you want to ask us, you've probably been listening to us chuntering on for quite a while now, please feel free to put something up on the chat. The other thing I suppose I'd say about, yes, you're right, actually, the equipment, there is just so much choice out there, but making that connection with the commercial world, they just don't see it, do they?
Mm.
I was dating a couple of years ago, quite a few years ago now, that she was texting me that a friend of hers was having a sex toy party and she was thinking of maybe buying something. I said, I will give you my credit card now, buy whatever you want.
Good answer. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So, Winter, do you think with BDSM and so forth, is there a larger percentage of it, or do more disabled people head that way, or what? Have you had any findings there?
So the bulk of my work is in the pansexual kink world rather than the gay men's kink world, but I do find quite a lot of people with various forms of disability issues. And I think that's because you're talking about a community where there's a really strong cultural sort of value around communication and negotiation. I mean, for almost any kink activity, there's going to have to be some level of negotiation and looking at people's ability levels and that sort of thing and skill levels. So there's already really clear structural frameworks for how to have those conversations that can easily be adapted into how do we have conversations around my needs as someone with a disability. So for instance, I have a compromised respiratory system, and I was waterboarded once and I got pneumonia, and my doctor was like, well, that was pretty fucking stupid to be waterboarded when you have bad lungs. So like people wouldn't think of that as a disability issue, but it's the kind of thing that I need to, that I should have brought up, and that people bring up all the time. Like, oh, I have asthma, so if you're gonna be beating me, like I need a signal to say like I'm having trouble breathing. Or even if it's just around desire, I like to be touched in this way. I don't like to be touched in that way. I like to play in this fashion. I don't like to play in this fashion. So because there's already so much sort of structure around how to have those conversations, I think that it's a place that people with disabilities often find that there is a lower bar to entry in terms of effort, because you don't have to explain the idea that you have to have those conversations. It's the same thing I see in my, I teach a whole class on sex and relationships between cis and trans people. And it's the same sort of thing where there's this, there are these, if you're in the kink world, there's already all sorts of conversations about how you like to be touched, or what you like your genitals called or don't like your genitals called, and things like that.
So because if you've acquired an injury or you're starting out on this journey, are there any, where would you, I can see that even if you're not on the face of it into the kink scene, the BDSM and so forth, it's a great learning resource for somebody to discover themselves and come back and take that on, and then maybe take that on outside of the world and go back having gained confidence, if you like. I mean, are there any websites, or what's your recommendations for a good route in?
I mean, I'm a big fan of, if someone has the financial resources to do so, getting involved with some of the bigger festivals and conferences, because those have great educational opportunities and play opportunities and mixers and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of people I know, so the kink and swinger and sex positive worlds have crossed over a lot over the last 20 years, from a time when they used to be extremely separate. So like, I know people who have a lot of fun at kink events, who don't do a lot of the stuff you'd typically think about as terribly BDSM-y. Maybe they're just into like watching people play, or they're into the exhibition stuff, or they like having sex outdoors, or what have you. Like, there's a lot of people. You have to sort of be willing to be around people who are doing a lot more hardcore things. You have to be someone who's comfortable being in a space where someone will happily show off their massive bruises, but not necessarily be someone who's like, I definitely want to be tied up and whipped. Chris, I think Thomas may have had a question.
Oh, where's can you help me on this one? My system's a bit dodgy here. Can you pick up the?
I'm here.
Hello. Hi, Thomas. Yes.
Hi.
Welcome.
Right. I have autism, but I also have a T3 to sacrum fusion after scoliosis correction. So I'm not paralyzed as such, but I've had a lot of nerve pulled around with. And does anybody, and I've had lots of surgery down in my thighs as well to try and reduce the spasm from my CP. Does anybody on the panel or anybody else know of any reason, anatomically or otherwise, why somebody's nerve inputted would actually get better after their correction than the usual worse? And does anybody know whether there is in fact a nerve that runs behind the shaft in between your legs?
That's a good question, Thomas. Anybody got any input to give on that one?
I mean, I'm definitely not a medical professional in the slightest, and you're welcome to contact the specialist nurses at the SIA, who will probably be able to give you a more clinical view as to why that is. I mean, I know people who've had fixations following syringes and various different things where the decompression has reduced the pressure on the nerves, which has induced some form of additional feeling or sensation or control. But as far as the nervous system, I don't even want to pretend that I know what I'm talking about.
Can you put your number? Martha, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you email me with, sorry, I didn't catch the gentleman's name.
It's all right, Thomas. I'll send you my contact details.
Yeah.
I'll give him your details, Thomas.
Right, will do.
Thank you.
I wanted to... Hi, Mitchell.
That one I agree with, that other people have had disc surgeries that were creating pressure on the nerves that serve the genitals and have regained function. And also there's two primary nerves that serve your genitals from your lower sacral area, called the pelvic and pudendal nerves. Both of them run through to your penis. So and Barry Komisarek, who presented on Thursday morning, if you look at his talk, he is someone who could answer questions, really, detailed questions about neurophysiology.
Martha, can you get me his details, please?
Barry? Yeah, sure.
So
Cut this off because my dog is barking in the background.
real world is getting in again, isn't it? The real world. I wanted to ask Winter, maybe some of the other participants, what the difference is, because the other three of us, we acquired our disability, our impairment at a point. I was 30, the other two guys were 19. How is there a different, well, there obviously is, what differences like to share between, having it from birth or earlier on or pre-puberty, how that affects your sexuality?
I know for me, it was this interesting thing where even the people around me, adults in my life, didn't understand that my experience of sexuality was not entirely tied into disability. So my folks, for instance, saw everything through the lens of my disability. So like I came out as gay very young for the time. I was 13, which isn't that young anymore, but in '93, it still was considered quite young. And my identity as gay and my experience as a gay person was very, very important to me. And it was something that my parents just didn't get. I mean, they understood that I was gay, but they didn't get that that was important because they saw everything through the lens of my disability. And so toward the end of her life, my mother had a very funny conversation of the fact that when I was young, I was really focused on sort of what being gay was going to mean for my future as an adult in terms of relationships and sex. And my mother was very focused on what the Tourette was going to mean about in terms of my future in dating and relationships. And actually, on the balance, it turns out she was probably right in terms of which thing to be worrying about. It was definitely something where I was always very conscious of. I was one of those sexually precocious kids, so I have a memory of some sexual drive and agency and naughty things I did at sleepover parties before my tics became a really prominent issue. But the vast majority of my experience in terms of growing up as a sexual being was with the Tourette. And there wasn't the jarring moment of that you gentlemen talk about, well, okay, now everything is different. Instead, it was a much more gradual experience of trying to figure out where disability was going to fit into this world I was entering into.
Understood. I've got a question here. It's probably one for Mitchell, actually, from Evan. Any info on dealing with testicular pain or blue balls?
I would need more information as far as as far as the situation which this is experienced, because quote unquote blue balls in the context of, getting an erection and not ejaculating and feeling pain in the testicles is a result of a vasocongestion or a buildup of blood, right? And so, in the case of, and is there equivalent for female genitals? Well, I think there would be, as far as, because as I said, it's a buildup or vasocongestion of blood without release, which could cause pain. So if we're talking about it just in the context of sexual excitement, then we have to look at ways of relieving that, and so and I don't know, let's say whether it's a man or a woman, and I'm just talking here based on not expertise, because I haven't read anything on alleviating this in people, with disabilities. But if it is because of, sexual excitement that's not, satiated, and that blood is still building there, I think that perhaps, and this is just theoretical, using a vibrator, if you're not using one already, even if you can't feel it, that may stimulate some kind of, strong response, may help, dissipate that otherwise it's, I don't know how long it's taking for each individual who asks to resolve itself, but it will resolve itself over time if we don't have a chance to kind of bring ourselves down, so I imagine, it's just like when I get a dysreflexic headache, when I get high blood pressure, when I'm stimulated, because sexual activity, like with a vibrator, will go to my head, it will make my blood pressure go up tremendously, and it doesn't downregulate. So like if I'm going to use a vibrator with the purpose of like trying to ejaculate, I have to take some medication first that will keep my blood pressure from going too high. So, we don't always have the ability, because of changes in our neurological system, to either upregulate or downregulate, so.
Yeah,
that's I want to know. I want to note that especially for people with sensory impairment, if you are going to use a vibrator, whether you have an innie or outie bits, but like if you're using a penis vibrator in particular, that even if you, or especially if you have sensory impairment, it is important to make sure you use lubricant with that, because a lot of the modern really powerful penis vibrators, I don't know quite as much about some of the internal vibrators, but such as the Fun Factory Manta or the Hot Octopus Pulse, can cause significant abrasion that you could not notice. It's something that we run into even people with full sensory awareness, that if you don't use some lubrication, you can get injury there.
I remember when I...
Thank you for that addition, Winter.
I remember when I started out on the fertility program at Stoke Mandeville, from which I have a 23-year-old son these days, so that one worked. And back in the day, it was, the consultant was using this thing so hard that I had like a massive blister on the underside of my penis where he had not held back at all. He'd really thrown himself at it, you know, and it was like, whoa, what's all that about?
Well, I had a slightly different experience. When I was first injured, they wanted to take a sperm sample to freeze, which is actually what we're going to use for IVF when the clinics open up again. But they had to use the internal probe to induce ejaculation through prostate. Now, I can't feel anything, but I had about 3 nurses holding my legs down because it was spasming like crazy. And that's now deemed too barbaric, so they don't do that anymore. But I do have the Vibrex, sort of the pincer style vibrator now to induce an ejaculation. But sometimes that can take up to 30 minutes. And again, you know, I do get dysreflexic as well. So I've got to be hyper aware that it's not burning or causing abrasions, or there's no internal damage being done. So you know, I got quite a bit of training on it from the spinal unit prior to actually taking it home to use, which was really helpful.
Yeah, I was left to my own devices. I did the same thing, but you've got to learn how to use them, haven't you? And having that probe, that probe, dearie me. Yes.
Well, they do like the Ferticare vibrators, but like £800 to buy, and you can only get them sort of on the NHS. And there's an argument for why should only people who are going through fertility treatment have access to a vibrator that's going to cause an ejaculation, when actually that might be part of someone's sexual activity or play, or part of the ejaculation being part of the process. But I say with the cost of them, they're not exactly easy to just nip down to Love Honey and pick one up.
But isn't that the same with all disability equipment? They always add a zero to the price.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You know, we talked earlier about the medical profession and their attitudes. And have any of the guys found any sort of approaches that's worked with them to break through that barrier with a health professional?
I think with the way that we're positioned within the rehab settings, in that they're much better, especially because we have Michelle, who works in the spinal units, which I go into, where she, that barrier of the taboo of talking about sex and intimacy is already broken, because we have a specific person they can go and speak to. I think that's really opened up the minds of the healthcare professionals, and in the way that they approach the wider holistic side of rehabilitation. It's not just get into a chair, learn to transfer, go to work. It's that go home, continue with a relationship, build a relationship. But also they're very aware of, most healthcare professionals in the regions where an officer is based for the SIA, we talk about the intimate side of our relationship, how we manage our bowels, how we manage our bladder. The sexual positions I can get into is discussed in presentations I give to students in university. So they've got an idea that subject isn't taboo. It can be addressed, it can be spoken about. It doesn't matter what level injury you are. If you vented or what, like I say, you can still have someone sit on your face if you can't move anything else. And opening just that one comment can really break down those barriers. Well, that's what I'm finding anyway in the northwest of England.
Mike, what's it like in the States?
We actually have a term, the independent living model, that we've been pushing here in the States for the last probably 30, 40 years, to get away from a medical model view of people with disabilities in general, instead of going home from the hospital and looking at all the medical aspects of your life, looking at the environment and how do you adapt the environment so that it suits the person. And that has sort of parlayed into, like Gary was saying, people giving lectures at colleges. I give a bunch of lectures at or local colleges talking about a more independent living philosophy that sex is normal and accessing community is normal and dating is normal and sort of mainstreaming things like that, and that everyone's different, disability or not. And quite frankly, all you have to do to have a disability is live long enough if you're lucky. So,
Hello.
Well, to be honest, I take the view that everybody's got an impairment. You're impaired by your job, your family, the fact you have to wear spectacles. Everyone's got an impairment of some sort or another.
Hello.
Yes, Thomas.
I still have a driver's license that says I've got no restrictions on it because they just kept renewing it for the past 28 years. So any of my friends that wear glasses, they have a little restriction on their license. So I say that according to the state, you're more disabled than I am because I've got no restrictions.
Brilliant. So, Thomas, you had something to ask?
Yeah, I'm going to be particularly graphic, but I think we talk about it in graphic terms here. But do the guys that have got paralysis have any tips for recognizing when you're sitting on yourself and you are getting an erection and then it becomes painful? And in one particular occasion in my life, it went black. And now I have to go, all my PAs have to go through the rite of passage of learning just to yank rather than be like a fairy about it.
That's great, Thomas.
Right.
So do you want to take that one, Gary? I think we're going back to dysreflexia again, aren't we?
We are, but I'm in a very different position to Mike in that I do have hand, and yourself, Thomas, I do have arm and hand function. My spinal injury doesn't affect my upper limbs. So part of my routine of getting dressed, get my boxes on, put my jeans on, pulling my testicles from underneath me, getting in my chair, could be checking. If I'm in the day and I'm thinking, oh, I'm banging headache, I'm spasming, it's if it's not that my bladder's full, it's probably that I'm sat on myself. But then again, that again can cause pain, can cause involuntary erections. Because I know myself, when I go to the gym and I transfer onto a weights machine, I'm sort of doing weights, look down, it's like, and the little man's popped up to say hello, and it's, oh God, sort of trying to hide these things. And it is because of the pain caused from sitting on something that I'm not used to sitting on, or it's quite possible that I've transferred and I'm sat on my testicles. But I do have that ability to check myself, but it's just recognizing those symptoms and those signs, whether it's, say, a headache or an increased spasm or feeling a bit flushed. Think, right, there's something wrong somewhere. Let me go through the process. Is it my feet, my shoes too tight? Is it my bladder's full? I actually probably know I'm just sat on myself. So again, if it's just a quick adjustment, but I am physically able to do that myself.
Ironically,
Mine's I'm a little bit different because I don't move throughout the day. Once I'm positioned in my chair, that's where I am for the day. Even if I spasm, I don't move. Like my legs may bounce or my arms may bounce, but I'm not, my torso and my hips aren't lifting up and moving around. So when I get positioned in the morning, whether it's in and out of my shower chair and then back into bed to get dressed and then into my power chair, I multiple times through the morning, I'm saying to my attendants, make sure I'm unbunched, make sure I'm unbunched, make sure I'm unbunched, and I wear a Texas catheter through the day. So it's just like a condom catheter. It connects to a tube. So when I get someone putting, wiping it down on the sides and then rolling a condom on, half the time I'm popping an erection. So transferring then from shower chair to bed and then back again. If it's not back down, I've got to be careful leaning forward, but I'm constantly reminding my attendants, all right, make sure I'm unbunched, make sure it moves over, pull that, it's just staying vigil.
Vigilance is all.
What happens if you can't feel it? Because sometimes I end up becoming desperate for the change because I've been sitting on myself all day, and
Well,
then
Thomas, I found that over time I've recognised, as Gary said about, for me, it's an increase in spasm below my injury. I'm at T3 at chest level, and there'll be an increase in blood pressure as well because the autonomic side of things. So over time, I've just learned to pick up on those signals, or the signals have happened and I haven't realised, and then I've weed myself or something like that and think, yes, rewind your head. But I'm still learning. At the beginning of lockdown, I managed to do a really bad transfer and fall out of my chair and break my ankle quite badly. It took me 3 weeks to work out that it was my ankle that was broken. It wasn't the fact that I had cellulitis. So we're all learning.
And if you can't sense it, if you don't feel it, if you have an attendant with you that helps all the time, then maybe every 2 hours you should check. Just be part of the routine.
Yeah, part of the routine.
Or just every time you go to the bathroom or need help using the bathroom.
Definitely. It's all about planning, my friend. The moment you leave the front door of your house, you're solving problems.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're getting close to the end now, guys. Gary, anything you want to just sum up for you, where you are now and what works?
What works? Well, I'm, let's say, 17 years post-injured. Every one of my long-term relationships and sort of one-night stands have all been able-bodied. They've all been incredibly good-looking, and they've all not had any experience of disability. So they've literally, I've opened myself up and said, ask me anything. And they have asked me, sex, how do I do this, how do I do that? And I've given them the gory details, and they're like, oh, okay, let's try it. So I have to say, being paralyzed and a wheelchair user, I love my life. I think it's amazing. I say my disability, people always say disability doesn't define you, but it doesn't half make you who you are as well.
That's great.
Yeah, that's all I can say is I say, disabled or not, I still love the life I'm living. And and thanks for the opportunity for being able to share with you today.
What about you, Winter?
Refresh me exactly what you asked. I got focused on what Gary was saying, and I missed forgot already what the original question was.
Anything you'd like to give back to people, just to where you're at now and how they can go forwards well?
I think the big thing is always communication. Like that's, if there's no other skill you focus on, it's learning how to what communication strategies and styles work best for you, and how to communicate your needs and your desires to other people. And life is always changing, and figuring out what is immutable for you, what can't change. And sometimes what can't change is the reality of someone's disability. Sometimes it's also what you need in your life in other ways are things that you're not going to be flexible on, and thinking about where you have flexibilities. So like my husband and I took a 15-year-old into the house, took guardianship of a 15-year-old 8 days ago. And we're currently trying to figure those things out. Where do we need to be flexible to meet their needs, and where are things that we're not willing to give on? And that sort of self-knowledge is very important, and having a sense of what is important to you, I think, is just incredibly critical.
And you, Mike?
Well, congratulations, Winter. Taking on a 15-year-old is going to bring a whole new wonderful set of chaos to your life that I'm sure will be thrilling and all kinds of stuff. For me, when I woke up in the hospital after I got shot, I was pissed. I mean, I was so just angry and consumed, and there were only two things on my mind. And people always laugh when I'm giving talks or lectures. They laugh because I say the two things on my mind were, number one, I wanted to kill the guy that shot me by my own hand, no one else. and I want to know if I could ever have sex again. And those were the only two things on my mind. And then I witnessed a show of support with my friends and my family and my fraternity brothers and guys I grew up with and cousins and all these people that just swarmed to my side and to tried to help me and lift me up and pull me back into a world that was different, but every bit as full and rewarding as it was before. And I'm like, I agree with you, Gary. I wouldn't change it for the world. I like who I am now, and all those experiences shaped me dramatically. There's a line out of a book I read a long time ago. I think it's called Meditations from a Movable Chair, and the line that sticks with me is to see enough and hear enough, to taste, touch, and smell enough, to age the mind a decade, but leave the body as it is. I've had a couple of those moments through the years. So number one's getting shot, and of course it changed my body, but it aged my mind a decade. And the life I live now is pretty full and rewarding. So I'm right there with you, Gary. It's
Mike. Mike, I have to say that quote I think is the perfect way to wind up this session. Could you just do it again for us slowly so we can because I thought that was wonderful.
I don't remember what I said.
The quote you got from the book. Meditations.
Oh yeah. To see enough and hear enough, to taste, touch, and smell enough, to age the mind a decade, yet leave the body unchanged. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that pretty much covers it. Don't you all? I think. Thank you very much for joining us here on this our little discussion here, and I hope you've got something from it. How you guys feel? All right.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
And thanks for moderating, Chris. You did a great job.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Winter, if you have a moment, if you haven't been looking at the chat box, you have a lot of fans out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, right. I'm not quite sure what the protocol is for leaving, but I'm just going to wave and say goodbye.
Thank you, everybody, for doing this. Really appreciate you.
That's been great. Thanks for organizing, Martha.